Hello, today I want to talk about fingertip mice, but most notably the HSK Pro, which I've been maining for probably a year now. In general, I've been using fingertip mice for about 2 years. I've occasionally gone back for the OP1 and some more. It's been like 2 full-size mice that I gave a try for a little bit, but it's mostly a fingertip. I'm mostly a fingertip mouse user now. So before I get into the discussion of the HSK Pro, I want to talk a little bit about the state of the fingertip mouse market, why you would want to use a fingertip mouse in the first place, and then I'll talk about the HSK. But if you just want to hear about this particular product, then I would recommend skipping to the timestamp. So the first thing to talk about is why would you use a fingertip mouse in the first place? There's a lot of people in the community who are quite vocal about fingertip mice. I think particularly Borzy is really not a fan of these things. And I can understand why somebody would be skeptical of this as like a concept or even just like as something to use in general, because it is strange and it is difficult and it is very, just different. It's something that it is hard to use casually. It's something you kind of have to invest some time into in order to develop comfort and honestly technique with. But let's talk about the reasons why you want to use them in the first place. So if I were to use a mouse like the OP1, for example, let me make this camera a little bigger for now. If I'm holding it like this, my normal sort of claw grip type thing, or even fingertip like this is the amount of range of motion that I have going downwards and upwards. This is as far as I can comfortably go while aiming, which is not nothing. It's good for fingertip adjustments, it's good for micro adjustments, but when you compare that to the HSK Pro, where I can go all the way down here and all the way up here, it's a pretty significant difference in terms of my flexibility and range of motion. So if I get an example here, I'm going to stand over here and only use my fingertips to aim for a little bit. It's not the prettiest thing ever, but I do have a range of motion and I can kind of play. And my sensitivity in this game is I don't know, 33, 35, something like that. So it's not exactly high either. So if you would use a fingertip mouse with a high sensitivity, you'd even get a greater benefit in terms of range of motion. Basically, the main thing I'm getting at here is that by using a fingertip mouse, you can kind of make your fingertips a bigger part of your aiming equation. You can put them more in the driver's seat as to how much of a role they play in your aiming process and your aiming technique. So the other thing that allows you to do that places more emphasis on the fingertip motions, is the weight. So the HSK Pro is 29 grams. There's an M2K, which is 23 grams, and there's also the Zero mouse, which is 19, and the HSK non-4K is 26 or something like that. So you're getting really, really lightweight. And for the most part, you wouldn't really see that much of a benefit if you're a claw user, right? A lot of people are almost snobbish about the fact that they use heavy mice, or they kind of look down upon the lack of testosterone possessed by those who want to use really light mice. And that sentiment, I feel is not as applicable when you're a fingertip user. Well, it's kind of nonsense in general, but in particular, when using fingertip mice, having your fingertips require less effort to actually move the mouse around, thanks to it being so light, makes a pretty significant difference for how active they will be intuitively while aiming. So while I really don't mind using the OP1, I got mine to be I think just under 40 grams? I can't remember, but it's around 40 for sure. And that's good, right? That's a really solid weight for a mouse. It's still, it's not almost double, but it's 1.5 times the weight of this mouse I'm using right now. That is noticeable. And my movements are a bit more sluggish as a result of it. So yeah, that's another benefit. And in general, it's hard to push that low of a weight for the people who do want something like that. Because I feel like even outside of the fingertip argument, having more precise tools is something that's exploded in almost every discipline, where, like for violin example, people will opt for like carbon fiber bows and things like that because they're a little bit more lightweight. And I feel like just in general, having like a lighter handle in your table tennis is bad, right? these are all things that are common in other disciplines for just being more precise when things are lighter. But yeah, so I think that within the peripheral space, it also makes sense that people are starting to push towards it as like the aiming skill ceiling is being pushed and things like that. So, you know, if you were interested in a mouse that light, there's really not that many options. Like, it's the HTX Mini. I can't think of anything else that's like in that 20s range, really. So, yeah. It feels almost like aiming with an empty hand because of it's so light. And that's an ideal that not everybody wants to aspire to, but it is like very intuitive to aim when your aim feels like that. I think most people would agree. Okay, I wouldn't say it's entirely like aiming with an open hand, but it is more like using a pen than it is like a mouse. Especially the HSK Pro, but true for a few other mice too. In the sense that it's a very lightweight object that you're more articulating with your fingers precisely than doing these like big and gross movements that a lot of other, I wouldn't say mice require you to do, but it feels like almost a different motor skill because of how much additional focus is placed on your fingertips and their ability to make very fine motions. Yeah, so that's the main selling point. Range of motion, how light they are, and how they allow your fingers to be a lot more active. Let me show you all of the mice that I have right now. So I can give you a sort of a brief overview of the market as it stands and why I ended up with the HSK Pro in particular. So I'm going to move my webcam over a little bit, talk about this. So the first one that came out was called the Husky, or the HSK Plus. Well, this is the wireless version. They had a wired one. That was the first. And it's more or less like having a mouse that has the back cut off. That's kind of how it feels to aim too. So it interested me because as somebody getting back into fingertip grip at that point, I wanted that ability to make more fingertip based adjustments and just like not have it touch my palm when I would pull down. And this mouse does accomplish that to an extent. Nowadays, I don't know if I can really recommend it. I've heard that the Darmoshark M5 is quite similar with a few spec improvements, so you could look into that if it's something that interests you. That sort of like half mouse idea. But the one complaint I do have with it is the hump is actually a little bit high for a fingertip mouse. Like, it's not insanely high, and if you do want to like claw it or like rest your palm on it sometimes with small hands, you definitely could. Like, this is me clawing it. It doesn't look that small, honestly. But yeah, I have pretty small hands. But yeah, it would touch my palm before getting like all the way into like my palm, just because of how high the hump is here. It's not high, but for a fingertip mouse it is, because it really seems like you wouldn't want it at all. But yeah, still a solid option. Just in terms of shape, really, it's just safe. From there, I tried the Keychron M4. So this is an interesting little guy. I think the most noteworthy aspects of it are how precise it feels, because the grip width right here is thinner even than this tiny HSK Pro. I think it's a little bit heavier though, like 34-ish grams. And the buttons curve down so much that they feel also very precise as a result. My main issues with it come down to the way that it's curved within its shape is a bit strange. I kind of don't like where it curves in, because it makes me want to grip it at the thinnest point. But to me, that didn't feel right. It felt like I was gripping behind the sensor and in the back half of the mouse, which I didn't love. The sensor part, because wrist adjustments would get faster than if, well, you think about it, like if this is the sensor right here, this is a much greater range of motion compared if the sensor was here, where it's a bit shorter. That's not a great example, but hopefully you know what I mean. If your sensor is further forward, your sensitivity will feel higher with wrist-based movements. And it wasn't a huge issue, but it was noticeable. Main thing definitely was the shape. So it is cheap though, so if you want to just dip your toes into fingertip mice, this is a decent option, and it's one that I respect for trying something interesting with shape. It just didn't totally fit my style. Maybe if you were the type that would hold it more forwards, or like further forward in your hand, and have your pinky forwards as well, I could see it being more comfortable. But when trying to rest my pinky on this like hump here, I don't know, I didn't love it. Then there are these sort of small mice, which if we compare to the OP1, there is a noteworthy difference in the size here. Let's see if I can get a better example. So yeah, it's pretty noticeably shorter. And I thought this would be a cool middle ground, because with full-size mice like the OP1, you have a feeling of stability and like evenness of weight distribution that I think it's harder to get from a fingertip mouse. There is something that just feels slightly more like balanced when I go for a flick using the OP1, and I was hoping that I could get a similar feeling out of these sort of small full-size mice, where I have enough room for fingertip adjustments, but I wouldn't have that issue of having it be too wide and feeling a little bit difficult and imprecise, and still getting that benefit of the balancedness. And this thing was okay. This one is the Darmoshark M3 Micro, by the way. It was okay. The main issue that I have with it is that the weight is kind of high for how small this mouse is. It's like 46 grams or so. And yeah, like it's not super heavy, but compared to this, which is 29, going from, it's like not that much bigger, and it's almost double the weight. You will notice it in the feeling of your micro adjustments and how much extra force you have to exert to be precise. Then there are 3D printed options, which I'll show you a few of these insane mice. I haven't used the Zero mouse, and I haven't used a few other popular 3D printed ones like the Piranha Mouse Mods ones, but those tend to optimize for weight more than anything else. These three are optimizing for shape. This one is kind of like Zero mouse inspired. So the main issue I have with all of these mice, like all four of them, is the sensor position. I mentioned it's a small issue on the Keychron M4, but it's a pretty big issue for me with not so much the HTK. This one's a small offender, but these are all big offenders, where it uses a Viper V2 PCB. And what that ends up causing is that I showed you with the M4, when I grip it in my normal, or what feels intuitive to grip it, it's behind the sensor, right? My thumb and my ring finger, just by a little bit. When I grip this one intuitively, the sensor here is like all the way in my palm, and that's kind of an issue for me. Having it be slightly faster on my wrist movements is okay. Having it be like noticeably slower on my wrist movements was really, really strange to get used to. It's like the feeling of using a different like M yaw, you know what I mean? Where, okay, that I say you know what I mean on a pretty insane unhinged statement, but in the sense that like something doesn't feel quite right, where it doesn't go as fast as you want to, but only sometimes. This mouse was interesting though, but there has some design flaws and I think make it difficult to main. And then there's also fingertip mods, so if you are not into mouse gore, I would look away now. My poor KPU has been reduced to this, but it actually is very cozy. I think there is something here that could be interesting. I mentioned this last week, I couldn't find it, but I found it now. Just the fact that this was already a pretty good fingertip shape, just a little bit long and a little bit heavy, and this kind of solved a lot of those issues on top of paracording, which makes the rubber cable less of an offender too. The fact that I've got this like section for my pinky to rest on is quite comfortable, and the perceived grip width is actually quite thin because of the way this is indented. But I do think for a fingertip mouse, it would have to be a little bit smaller and a little bit like lower. But anyway, I'm on a tangent here. Pretty much all of the high-end fingertip mice are pretty symmetrical. I guess the HTR is not quite symmetrical, but the way that it ends up playing with the way that it falls in your hand is more or less like a standard mouse from what I heard, at least, because I don't have one. But yeah, this trend of smaller full-size mice is interesting, and I hope it's the one that continues. And I hope the HTX Mini is good, because it's the only other one that's kind of dipped into that idea. But yeah, again, the other one is the HTR, which I've heard from a Battlefield player who's really good named Zyle that he prefers it to the HSK, and it fixes two of the main issues that I have with this mouse, which I'll get into later. But I haven't tried it myself, so I can't really give a recommendation for or against. And then there's this thing, which is not one that I think anybody watching this video will pick up, called the Zaukoenig M2K. I think they have an M3K now, which is even more of an exorbitantly expensive mouse. This thing I feel almost insulted by. I feel almost scammed. I wouldn't go that far. It's an impressive feat of engineering, right? To be 23 grams, to be made of all like carbon fiber and have this like tiny PCB with incredible like latency. My issues with it come down to shape, where it does just nothing for you, basically. It is actively uncomfortable for me, which might be because of my grip. I can't totally judge it for that, but the way that it sort of curves outwards at the front makes my ring finger feel like it is being fought. Like I'm trying to fight this to get pushed inwards and have more precision at the front of the mouse. But instead, it just feels like very uncomfortable. Creates some extra pressure right here, which I don't really love. And then yeah, the cable is just kind of unforgivable. I don't know. How can you put a rubber cable on this thing? I guess they need to have like a high quality signal to make the 8K work, because it was a while ago now, but it's just not good enough in my opinion. It's something that I've always noticed while playing, and it's something that I tried to fix with a zip tie mod to make it angle upward instead of just dragging around in the pad all the time, but it's not enough. It's just kind of not good. But yeah, I mean, the other options would be just small. If you have larger hands, you could use small mice like the OP1. And I think this is actually a great fingertip mouse if you had hands that were like a centimeter bigger in both directions to mine, which is like, would be like 16 and a half, 17 centimeters long. I could see that being pretty good. Other things, well, I don't know. You can look into it. Most of the reviewers will tell you what mice are good for fingertip grip if it's a more standard size, but this is particularly about fingertip mice. So let's get into why I still use the HSK Pro over all of those other options. So the main thing is really what I talked about earlier with how pen-like this mouse is, where all of the other mice, aside from maybe the M4, feel like smaller versions of normal mice. Mostly a factor of grip width and a bit of shape as well. And also weight. But the HSK Pro was so strange that the first time that I wrote this review, which was like a year ago, I was thinking about doing reviews, and I had written up one for fingertip mice, and all the ones I had at the time, it was one that I decided was a cool idea, but not quite for me, because I mentioned it was too much like a pen. It was so different from the normal aiming experience that I hadn't put enough time into it and improved with it enough to make it usable. It was that strange and different. But it felt like it had potential. And when I started playing a little bit of Kovacs again, I found that it was way easier to make micro adjustments with this smaller mouse, thanks to, you know, how much more space and how much lighter it is. But yeah, it had a learning curve, which was interesting for a mouse, because normally it's pretty easy to pick up whatever. The other thing that stopped me from using it a lot at first was the pain that I incurred from using it, because of its very small size and to an extent its shape, which I'll talk about when I get to the disadvantages or the downsides. It kind of caused me some pain because I felt like I could not grip it comfortably without applying some amount of extra pressure, which over the course of a game and having it generally feel unwieldy and adding additional tension led to some, you know, that pressure leads to pain over time. Or at least strain, if nothing else. Maybe not actively, you know, carpal tunnel or anything like that. Oh, that was bad. But I don't think that this mouse is like perfect by any means. Even though it's the one I settled on, I think that's more testament to how rare pen type mice are within the market these days, as opposed to being like, you know, the perfect iteration of this sort of pen mouse style. And not that you grip it like a pen in any way. It's just like your fingers are so close together and you use your fingers so much in the aiming process, or at least you can, that it feels more pen-like. The actual pen mouse, the Titan that Logpile did a review on, it did quite well. That one I haven't tried, unfortunately. Though I do want to say, this is kind of a random aside, so I apologize, but the person I mentioned last video, Dolphin Rider, he plays against a scout in 1v1 from time to time, like hit scan duels, named Yum Yum. So Yum Yum, known for being on Furgotech and cat noises. Well, Furgotech is the best team in TFT, by the way. Well, arguably. He is considered to be one of the best 3 players in MGE, which is the 1v1 mode. And the only time that my friend Dolphin Rider says that he beats him is when he uses the pen mouse, which is interesting because that guy has like 50 million mice. So there's probably something to be said about either the shape or the weight that makes this style kind of promote. Well, I don't know if it promotes too much, it's just good. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about here? So yeah, this is the one that I think is the most well-rounded in terms of these super small fingertip mice. So what are the downsides of using a fingertip mouse? Because that is quite relevant as well. I'd say the main downside is the fact that it's hard to be stable with one of these mice. I still don't consider myself like a super stable player, even though I feel like I've gotten to terms with it for the most part. I will experience more shakiness than most players when I panic or apply too much tension. And gunfire, it's a little bit different, but even then, like some of my post-flick stuff is not the most clean. But yeah, adding pressure on top of that makes things a little bit unwieldy. And that's a decent word for it, is that it is a bit unwieldy. Requires a lot of practice specifically for this kind of mouse. And I think that it's not something that everybody wants to undertake. So in general, doing very fast motions with this kind of mouse is going to be a little bit harder just due to that weight distribution I mentioned earlier. I think would be the main cause. Actually, I don't want deft hands because I think it makes it so I don't consume ammo. Let's see, can I get something defensive real quick before I keep talking? Okay, no. I might die, we'll see. I kind of want to go... I want to go up top. And I think either due to how light it is or how most of the weight is kind of concentrated towards the front of your hand, or maybe just the addition of focus it places on the wrist and fingertips, it makes arm engagement just a little bit harder. Oh, hold on. No, he got me. Hold on, I gotta get myself out of the jam here. Alright, no, that's bad. It's so over for me. Okay, let's get out of here. Fun spot to TS in, but I kind of have to lock in or else I die. I was gonna say, yes, arm engagement. So with arm engagement, compared to things like the OP1, it is noticeably harder to get my arm involved in larger and grosser movements. Maybe the additional weight also could make a difference, where the weight makes it so I feel more stable by the end of arm-based flicks. And that makes it a bit easier to do without thinking about. It also could just be like a skill issue, I don't know. But I do think it's a little bit harder to engage for sure. aside from that, that metaphor I talked about earlier with the violin bow, I feel like when you get used to using a really light tool for whatever precise skill that you're performing, it becomes harder and harder to go back to that heavier one, especially when it's something as niche and as kind of specific skill-wise or technique-wise as fingertip mice are. Developing skill and technique with this mouse will make it harder to go back. Not that it doesn't translate, obviously, especially if you continue to use fingertip grip with larger mice or heavier mice, but I never feel as agile or accurate or fast. Maybe not fast, because then I guess I could always engage the arm more with like bigger mice and stuff, but the other two for sure, than I do with a fingertip mouse. And I think it's because of that very specific development of skill with this mouse. I'm just used to it now. So yeah, that is a downside for me, because like, you know, it's like when you use, oh god, I'm stuck. Like a 240 hertz monitor for the first time. You never ever complain about 144 until you get something that's a little bit more responsive, you know? And it won't be the case for everybody, I'm sure, but for the people it does resonate with, it may spoil your ability to use a lot of mice. So yeah, what I mentioned earlier about the HSK Pro being the main mouse that is pen-like and competent is kind of a downside as well. Because if this is a style that you enjoy, like it is for me, there's really not too many mice in the market that fill this niche. I'm hoping the HTR is small and light enough to do that, but I have to try myself to really make that kind of statement. It does seem like it would be, especially from what I've heard from Zyle, but yeah, not a lot of options if you're into this style, because I do think it is kind of distinct from the other fingertip mouse styles. Another benefit, by the way, is that if you have very small hands, these kinds of mice, they just feel right to me. For me, the XM1 was so big in my hands that like it felt like I was using a Zweihander. You know what I mean? Just where it just felt like I had no control over the front of the mouse because it's so heavy. That is one of the stupidest things I've ever said. Oh no, I was looking at my... Okay. In general, if you were getting into fingertip mice, you know, I don't think shape matters as much when you're using fingertip, to be fair, because it doesn't have to like fit in your palm the right way or be the exact length to fill your hand properly, so it matters a little bit less. However, I do still have some problems with the HSK Pro shape. Most notably, I don't love how it curves inwards at the front. See what I mean? Where it's kind of the opposite of what I described with the M2K, where it curves outwards. This one kind of has like a upside down V shape. It's subtle, but it is noticeable, and the result is that when gripping it, it does feel a little bit like it wants to leave your hand. And over time, I think that's a big part of what caused a lot of my pain with this mouse at first. Was that problem of like, I need to grip this tightly or it's gonna fly out of my hand. Or I just cannot get a very comfortable grip on it, have it feel stable while gripping loosely. So the solution is to grip tightly, and that's not a solution, that's how you get RSI. Why am I locking in? So... anything else I want to talk about with particularly HSK Pro? And I mentioned earlier the two things about the HTR that are supposedly improved from what I've heard from Zyle are the stability issue, and that sort of problem with the grip where it kind of wants to leave your hand. So that is big if true, because it is, I think, even lighter than this mouse, which is kind of insane. It is slightly larger, which I wouldn't mind. Like, the HSK Plus to the HSK Pro is a pretty significant difference in terms of size, but a slightly larger mouse probably would do me okay. I'm not 100% sure if the inward slope of the HSK Pro is something that I've gotten used to and actually like now, because maybe that contributes to how much my finger engagement is active. I cannot say for certain, but it's something to think about. But yeah, I would need to test another mouse of similar size and weight to actually have that A/B test. Until the HTR comes in, I cannot give you a clear answer. So let me talk about some of the other aspects of the HSK. I will say that like none of the specs that I'm about to bring up actually really matter. It performs how you would expect it to perform. So if everything you've heard about this mouse has been good so far prior to this, I don't think anything I'm going to mention in the specs will matter, except for maybe the clicks. So the clicks on the HSK Pro are a little bit heavy. They're not, I feel like if I were to have this in any other mouse, I wouldn't even notice them as, or like call them heavy at all, really. But because it's such a lightweight package, oh, I just got owned. I got one shot. Because it's such a lightweight package, and because it is a mouse that is relatively unstable, you don't have any palm contact, and the grip isn't amazing. I find this thing like unusable without grip tape, by the way. Like the coating is not amazing, so it really contributes to that feeling of it wanting to leave your hand. Anyway, especially on a low friction pad, like it's not so bad with this one, but with a Super Glide or a Sky Pad, I was having issues where I was thinking of these insane solutions to a problem that shouldn't exist, which is the mouse kind of losing stability when I would click. I would have a hard time clicking and not having my cursor go somewhere, you know, having it be perfectly stationary after the click, because the small amount of force required to actuate the switch was enough to make a small movement in the mouse. And I think that is most likely gonna, the stupid solutions I was coming up with were like using spacebar for ADS, which I kind of do anyway, but I was using spacebar for like shoot and like shift for ADS, and that was too far. I feel like that's indicative of an issue. It shouldn't be such a problem to press the left click button. Not that it's a huge problem, but on a very low friction surface, it was occasionally noticeable. So yeah, apparently the HTR does amend that as well, which is a big nod in its favor. Let's see, anything else? Side buttons are fine. Okay, the placement, actually, totally forgot about this. Placement of the side buttons is a little bit weird, actually, where with the HSK Plus, typically my thumb will end up next to mouse 5, the one that's in the back, right? And then I would reach forward for the second button. But for the HSK Pro, it ends up like somewhere between, and without my stupid mod, it would end up kind of like next to the front mouse button here, front side button. It's not that big of an issue, but if you use both buttons for pinging, you would have to regrip probably in a different way than you usually do to hit the side buttons. Or at least like move your thumb slightly differently to hit them. So yeah, very small issue, but something I've gotten used to. And I actually forgot that that used to be a big problem for me, because I would use mouse 5, or the back mouse button, for jump on Gundam Evolution, because jumping wasn't really that important. And that I was just missing it all the time when I started using this mouse. So aside from that, I don't remember the default skates that well. I think they're like fine, like kind of average. The grip tape it comes with is also not great. I would say below fine, very slightly. It's because it's worse, like noticeably worse than BTL, Super Grips, and Cicada Wings, and like the, you know, whatever else that is similar in that higher end of third-party grips, because it's thicker and less grippy. So, you know, there's not too much reason to use it aside from it being pre-cut. Sensor performance, again, fine. Nothing I've noticed being in like a problem. I've heard some people have complaints about the 4K's implementation. And I will say that while using 4K, your battery gets cooked. Like there is, you get like a day out of a 4K. Out of 2K, you can get like 2 days, which is still not great, but you have to get into the habit of charging it overnight. Unfortunate, but not that big of a deal. At least in my experience, the higher polling rates have been fine though. I have no complaints, so I can't really speak on the issue that some of the people were having. Speaking of the battery, some people had a issue on release where their HSK Pros are exploding. It would literally, the battery would combust and they would burn their hands. So that is no longer an issue. That only happened on release due to like some shortcut that Jim was trying to take. Or was forced to take. I don't really remember the details, but it doesn't happen anymore. It's not funny. It's not funny. The build quality also it's fine. It doesn't have any side flex, which is kind of insane, but I guess it's kind of supported by the PCB is how he achieves that. But for such a small, kind of cheap looking object, I really have never noticed any like creaking or anything like that. So that also reminds me, the review is basically over. Basically, I would give this thing like I don't know, it's hard to rate something like this because it's kind of one of a kind in the market right now. Because even though I do have complaints with it, there's nobody else doing it better. So I can't... These are like things that would be nice in theory, but don't exist, right? So I'll give it, let's say like an 8.7, right? Because it does have a few glaring issues. I would say the clicks is a major issue. If it was just a little bit lighter, and it's not like that bad. Just if you want to use a high friction surface, it gets a bit cumbersome. Maybe major is a big word then there. Anyway, it's got issues basically, but still I think it's the most competent package that exists right now for like a pen style mouse, just in the sense of it being so precise and finger driven. One issue I did have, I totally forgot about, is that when I would use my normal grip of having this sort of like claw-like shape on the mouse, my pinky would be in quite a lot of discomfort or at the end of a session. Probably because like, I don't know, the difference in like elevation between the pinky and the ring finger was not enough for the pinky to be comfortable. And my pinky, I don't know, it's all sort of messed up where at the end of like 2 weeks, there will be like an indentation in the grip tape from where my pinky sits because it's just applying so much pressure for like no reason. And my solution to that was adding a little bit of extra elevation on the pinky by stacking grip tape. Which is funny that this is probably the sanest solution of the 3 that I tried. The other ones that I tried was attaching a Lego piece to it. I also tried... When I did the Lego piece mod, I also had 5 pieces of grip tape on the left mouse button to try to emulate the KPU, in the sense that the left button is higher than the right, and then it's got this like pinky sort of curvature. I wanted to make like an ergonomic HSK, and I kind of liked it at the time. But yeah, this has been a much more subtle mod, which I kind of appreciate. And then the other mod I did was I found some like 10-year-old, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like adhesive, like a tacky adhesive you would use to attach, I don't know, just for like general home use, you know, when you have 2 things you want to stick together, you bust out the adhesive, stick them together, and it dries, and then you're good to go. But it wasn't. Oh, actually, I have some. No, I can't show this. It's more mouse core. I can't reveal what I've done to my OP18K. So yeah, that one unfortunately would get crushed under the weight of my pinky after a few hours, but I kind of liked it back then. Which is why I was mad that G-Wolves came out with the clay after the fact. I thought of that shit first. And then everyone clowned on it, so I'm like, never mind, I don't take ownership of this. Anyway. I guess that's basically all I have to say. And the one thing I wanted to talk about, the Darmoshark, Can I get it to happen? I don't think so. I had the strangest issue with this Darmoshark M3 Micro, which I don't think I'll do a review on because it's not quite interesting enough for me. Where after like a day, my left click started squeaking, and I probably have a video that I can play. This issue is so weird, I don't understand it, and it stopped. I bet if I used it for like a day or two, it would start happening again, but I have no idea why, and it was driving me insane. I had to get some footage from Valorant to put in a video, and I thought it was an in-game sound. Where I was clicking around the menus, I'm like, okay, it seems like the squeaky noise happens in sync when I'm like scrolling through the menus. So whenever I click this like arrow, there's a chance that it plays a squeaky noise. Like, okay, maybe that's part of the Valorant in-game sounds. And then I stopped playing Valorant. It still kept going. I'm like, okay, maybe there's a mouse in my room. Was the next thought. Didn't find a mouse. Turns out it was literally the mouse. So yeah, that was absurd. I don't know how. I mean, it's Darmoshark, I guess. You kind of expect that from them. Any upcoming fingertip mice? I think Pulsar was doing one. They have like a few releases where it's like they have the same like base shape, and you can add these sort of modifications to get your own personalized one. And one of them was a fingertip one. So that one, it looks a bit like the Darmoshark M5, I think, where it's a safe sort of half mouse shape. So I mean, that's fine, but it's not really, doesn't interest me that much. And then yeah, the two that I didn't put in this video are the HTX Mini, which is kind of like the Darmoshark one, where it's just small. It's not really fingertip only. As well as I will say that if you wanted to claw this mouse, it would be interesting, but I don't think that good, because I don't know, maybe it would be fine. The thing that came to mind for me first was the fact that the sensor would be so far back, but it's not that bad actually. I don't know, you should try this. It's kind of cool. I was gonna say, oh yeah, and the HTR. HTR would be exciting to try. But I don't think anybody else is really innovating in this sort of very, very small mouse space, aside from like the modders and like the insane people. I appreciate my insane people though. But I think that is it. Got nothing else to talk about. Overall, if you're into the idea of having your fingers be a very active part of your aim, then you could consider something like this, or just another fingertip mouse in general. It doesn't have to be this. This one will take more dedicated practice to getting good with, in my opinion. It is really hard to make this thing stable and not like super unwieldy, especially if you use like average sensitivity. High sense, it can perform much more like a fingertip or like a pen sort of mouse. But on medium sensitivity, trying to combine some elements of like mainly fingertip plus wrist and, you know, more typical mousing technique, it will get a bit tricky. But yeah, that's my thoughts. I don't think I can go back. That's another thing I should mention, is that these fingertip mice have kind of transformed me as a player. I think, I don't know, it's hard to say how much has been just practice and how much has been like really improving with this thing and having it allow me to use my fingers, which are pretty good at aiming, I guess, as a big part of my aim. Because I don't know, when I watch my old gameplay, it feels so rigid and sluggish, and if I miss my initial flick, it would take me like 14 years to start like microing back to the target. I feel much more well-rounded as a player now, and I think a lot of that does come down to the fingertip mice. That also could be in part due to how small my hands are too, where like this Darmoshark mouse feels like right in my hands. It doesn't feel small really. So maybe the real issue is just that I have small hands, and these are the first mice that are like to scale. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.